it's Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and today we're going to be comparing store-bought fondant versus marshmallow homemade fondant. Now, I'm the type to really have only used store-bought fondant for actual cakes that I sold. However, I think that there are some pros to actually using the marshmallow fondant, but we're going to be going through comparisons of both right now. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is coverage. How does each one actually cover a cake? So I personally find that satin ice is really easy to work with. I like satin ice because I find it doesn't tear that easily and it's pretty malleable. It's also pretty forgiving if you kind of hem and haw over your cake and you really want to smooth things out. I find satin ice does give you ample enough time to be able to get everything smooth and everything in place. And if you shift things around, I find that it's pretty forgiving as well. Now, I've used other brands as well. I've used Wilton fondant and I've also used Fat Daddy-O fondant. I haven't used those brands as much, but I find that they are pretty good as well. Sometimes I have to add a little bit more cornstarch or a little bit more shortening to them depending on how they're reacting. Now, with every medium that you use, it really is all about the practice that you put into this. The reason that I actually started with satin ice in the first place is because I was told that people like the taste better. So that's why I switched over to it, and I've just over the years gotten really used to using this medium. Now for this particular cake, I did end up using my marshmallow fondant, but I did have to mix it with a little bit of satin ice in order to actually cover the cake. I didn't make quite enough marshmallow fondant. I found that it was pretty easy to work with as well. Now, even when I was just rolling it out by itself without any of the satin ice mixed in there, it rolled out really nicely. A little bit of snapback though, just slightly. Not too much to the point where it's actually unable to get nice and thin. However, it did snap back just a slight amount. Interestingly, when I actually mixed it together with the satin ice, it created a firmer fondant. So it made this part a little bit more easy to actually handle. Whenever you're paneling cakes this way, it is a little bit trickier. And I do find that that addition of the marshmallow fondant allowed it to stay up nice and tall for a little bit longer. So I was able to cut off that excess just a little bit more easily. Moving along to our next comparison, heat and steam. So of course, if you've watched any of my videos, you know I'm obsessed with steaming my cakes, and all of the store-bought fondants that I've tried have held up really well to this. And why do I steam my cake? I steam my cake to, first of all, get rid of any excess cornstarch, to bring the saturation of the color up a little bit, and it makes it really easy to attach fondant to fondant. Steaming your cakes initially will give it a really shiny finish, but after a couple hours or so, it's just gonna kind of have a slight sheen to it, but won't stay shiny. Now, the homemade marshmallow fondant pretty much reacted the same way, except it stayed shiny, and it actually stayed shiny for hours and hours. So I guess if you steam marshmallow fondant with my recipe, it stays shiny. The next thing I wanted to look at was how does it actually work when you're making fondant details. So with satin ice, really easy to work with. With most fondant brands, I've been able to make characters really easily. You add a little bit of Tylose powder in there and it makes things come together really quickly and dry really quickly as well. I'm also able to avoid any cracking whatsoever, and I can make lots of different things like florals as well. Now, I was skeptical about the marshmallow fondant just because I think back in the day when I originally made marshmallow fondant, I couldn't make anything out of it. But I slowly started to realize that was just because I didn't know how to work with fondant and not because of the marshmallow fondant. It was a little bit harder to work with, I will say, only because I felt it was a little bit stiffer than the fondant that I normally work with. But again, this could just be a practice thing, and if I worked with this more often, then I would be totally fine with it. Moving along to the next comparison, a little bit of a taste test. Now, I did try the marshmallow fondant and I have tried satin ice fondant several times. Now, take this with a grain of salt. I'm not a huge fan of fondant to begin with, so I may not be the best judge of this. However, I will say that the marshmallow fondant had a much more pleasant taste in my opinion, just because it tastes more like a marshmallow, and I do like marshmallows. So I did prefer this over store-bought brands. Now, this is probably the most important comparison of all. Which one is most worth it in terms of the money spent and time spent as well? So for store-bought fondant, it costs approximately $5 to $7 per pound. which after all is said and done, the homemade stuff actually costs around that anyway, because one bag of icing sugar here costs approximately $4 or so, and then you need to buy the shortening as well, and then you also need to purchase the marshmallows. Now the marshmallows are probably the cheapest part of all of that, but I also find with homemade, you end up losing a little bit of the product. It's really hard to kind of utilize every single little bit of marshmallow just because it's so sticky. Now in terms of time, it really isn't that difficult to make your own homemade marshmallow fondant, but it does take that little extra step. And it's not as if it comes together just in a few minutes. You do have to knead it, you have to make sure that you're getting the right texture that you want. And I will say that mixing it in the mixer really did make a little bit of a mess. So I tried as carefully as possible, but that's just what happens when you do baking and decorating, of course. So I really like to use the store-bought stuff still, even though I found that the homemade fondant tasted a little bit better. I just find that if you're making cakes on a large scale and you're doing it often and you have a lot of orders to do, I think it's definitely more worth it to just invest in the pre-made stuff. That being said, I have heard of bakeries actually making their fondant completely all the time, especially for the actual fondant that covers the whole entire cake. And to those bakers, I am just super impressed with your dedication to doing that. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!